Hello and welcome back to the Handstandcast with me, Emmett Lewis, and my co-host, Mikael Christiansen. How's things going, Mikael?
How are things going? I'm really fucking sleepy today. Yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about today. Today has been completely uneventful and I haven't talked to a single human being.
Yeah, I think this is kind of idea of like we should give everyone your big announcement. Mikael is retiring from hand balance for 5 days.
Oh yeah. Let's see when it happens. I don't think it's going to happen this weekend. I'm going to take a break of at least 5 days because I'm busted. And I haven't done that since 2012, right after we graduated. Then I had 5 days off last time.
The Mayan end of the world.
Yeah, exactly. This is like the fourth horseman of the apocalypse. Like, it is over. Forever.
We're like Joe Rogan on this podcast. We actually have a Jamie, but he's called Isaac. And he's one of our models, as you might have seen.
Usually in the start of these podcasts, Emmett fires him and then I rehire him. Isaac is great. Ish.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll leave our Jamie alone. Stop bullying. So, anyway, the topic for today's episode is, it's one of these ones that me and Mikael geek out a lot about as well. And I know a lot of people out there do as well, is all the weird stuff inside the body that may or may not be important to hand balance and what we can know about it. And, I think this is one of these episodes that we could do a few of.
Likely.
But we've got to start somewhere. And, we've been geeking out. We'd advise you probably to check out the transcripts on our website.
Definitely.
Because we'll put a lot of links and there'll be photos of some of the stuff we're talking about so you can follow along. And
I think on this one is probably the episode that, so far at least, that is the most relevant to look at the transcript because, there's a lot of the stuff that we reference that we can't really describe without you seeing certain pictures or reading certain things so that you also can see the references of some of the things at least that we banter about. So yes, anatomical variation. What does that mean? I guess the main thing it means is that the first time I started getting interested in into and understanding about this was when I have a very good childhood friend of mine named Kim, who is now an orthopedic surgeon. And whenever I would meet him, I would ask him all these kind of anatomy questions because I'm so fascinated by shoulders and muscles and the bones and all of that stuff. And of course, my kind of idea from how this looks is how the anatomy chart looks. And I mean, it has to make sense, right? And I asked him, so how is this? The attachments here and there. And he's like, you think it looks like that when you open people up? He's like, you open them up and then muscle fibers are fused. And why is that vein there? It should be over there. And you have no idea what you're looking at. He says, of course, kind of jokingly. But he really made the point that the actual insides of people are very, very different and very individual. And that's just something that's never discussed, obviously, because it's very hard to know. And very often it's not so relevant, but it's very interesting to actually understand that there are some certain factors and some that are maybe even observable. It's one of these things we've been nerding out about.
Yeah, it's definitely one of these things. I think there's a good meme that goes around some of the medical Facebook groups every now and then. And the gist of the meme, I'll try to find it and put it in the transcript, is what the anatomy books say it looks like. And it has a picture of a circuit diagram from electronics. And then beneath it goes, what it looks like when I cut you open. And it's a bowl of spaghetti. And it's kind of this kind of thing. I suppose this episode needs to come with a bit of disclaimer.
Definitely.
We're gonna say a lot of things we know about the body, which is obviously, let's face it, we are acrobatics coaches, so we are limited. There's going to be some things that might be controversial, which will be fine. There'll be other things that they may or may not be limitations. We don't know, but they are interesting. And it's not an excuse that you can or can't. The only reason you'll find out your own true level in all these skills is just to train, and eventually it will emerge. And a lot of these kind of limitations don't really cause problems till the upper high level. And on the flip side of the coin, these kind of weird structural anomalies are what can sometimes give someone a certain unique flavor to their handstand. I suppose with that flavor, we should speak about Sergey first.
It's a hand balancer actually. He's from Kiev. We will link his Instagram and so on. And like the reason we thought of him, of course, with this podcast is I remember like when he came out, like because he's a world famous hand balancer. He won Cirque du Mine, I think 2010, and he has like a very kind of specific style, kind of contortion-y hand balancing style. But he also has these like very specific way of handstanding. First of all, have you seen his wrists, Emmett? Like he does that kind of cupping hand, but to an extreme degree I've barely ever seen before.
That's where like I picked up that cupping hand shape.
The first time I saw it.
And then I started, I picked it up from him because I was training in the Catacombs in Berlin, which is a circus space there that no longer exists. And he was training there, and I was doing my pleb level hand balance. This was after you visited Berlin, actually. And I was back training handstands after getting re-inspired after meeting Mikhail. I was training my pleb handstands after doing some circusy stuff. And he was doing his thing beside me, just running his act. I noticed his hand position. I was like, that's really funky. So then I started actually screening. Now, his hand position will need to, possibly you'll be able to see it in the Instagram post. If not, he basically doesn't have the first knuckle down. His hand is kind of like a pyramid.
A very tall pyramid.
So I started playing with it myself because my wrists are okay-ish in that direction now. And I was like, okay, it makes sense. So I started giving it to my hand balancers who had greater than 110, 120 degrees of extension in the wrist. And it turns out it was quite a winner. Like if you look at Morgan,
he has a tendency
one of my
to do
students, I told him to do that now. He sometimes even puts his thumb under his thing to create a mini block for him on his super heavy shapes.
So like and the one thing that I also like noticed with him is that like, I mean, that we've talked about before is like there is this certain variation of elbows. It's something they refer to as a carrying angle, or like there is also a medical term called cubital valgus, which is then we've talked a little bit about that before on the casts, but and the exact use of valgus, I'm not exactly sure on how a medical professional would be referring to it, but essentially it has to do with a certain angle from the elbow to the hand, which you can observe if you have your arm hanging down by your side, completely neutral, and then you just rotate the forearm so that your palm is facing forwards without moving your arm in any significant way. People with cubital or this kind of carrying angle in the cubital valgus direction will then display kind of a significant angle from the elbow to the hand, meaning that the hand will then move away from the thigh, essentially speaking, so that you get this kind of outwards angle from the body. And what is cool is Sergey seems to have quite a lot of this, and there is this picture that we found on his Facebook page where he does this. He basically does kind of a Mexican handstand where he looks at the ceiling, so the head is through, but it's a Mexican where the body is completely diagonal. It's fully straight but diagonal, and you'll see that the shoulder flexion that he has is of course good. He has great shoulder flexion, but the elbow contributes a significant degree to being able to get his base of support underneath his center of mass.
Yeah, I kind of had a rough measurement of it, and it looks he's got about like 20 to 30 degrees of this. And you can see it if you look at the picture now. You can see that he's almost at a straight line from along the torso to the elbow, and then it just deviates off a huge amount.
Yeah.
And it's one of those handstands where like there's not a lot of people. You can like this slanted line handstand, you can do it, but even the topper level people who are like super good balance, super good shoulders, can't get anywhere close to the angle he can get. It's almost like a Mexican, but with a straight body.
Yeah, you can kind of like if you look at that picture, and you would imagine that he would have to do all of this shoulder flexion without any of this quote unquote help he has from that elbow angle, it would be in such an like the shoulder flexion would be so extreme that like I think I've barely seen anyone that would have enough to be able to recreate that position without this. Have you seen any?
I think I seen one person called in Ludmila Sobileva.
Yeah, some of her girls from
her school.
Crazy.
Some of her girls do it, but they do it like with super god tier shoulder flexion. Like they're young, they're clearly the hypermobile ones of the group, and they just have like immense shoulder flexion. They're getting close to his angle.
Yeah, but it just looks like it's so easy for him, and I think that like this. I mean, it's obvious that this amount of elbow actually does help him to be able to attain that position. I mean, it's like he's super damn good as a hand balancer. It's one of the types of things where you can see that in this position it's very clear that this angle is actually beneficial for the execution of the movement. And there's another observation that we've had also with this carrying angle, and the interesting thing there is that I tend to see it, or I think I tend to see it overrepresented among people who are reasonably talented or learning handstands fast, especially presses to handstand. Now, I know tons of people that learned handstands fast that do not have this, and I wonder whether or not like it's just an issue of like this type of elbow structure is quite noticeable. You kind of it pops a bit out, so it might be that it's just kind of a bias that I created in my own head. So that's why we talked about, like Emmett mentioned, that these are observations that we have. It's not something that we can make any specific we can't know whether or not these are actual truths, simply because like we don't have any control group, we don't have even anything in this. It's simply observations.
Yeah, but it's definitely one of these things that I noticed as well, that Mikael pointed me to this elbow structure and learning the press very quickly, and I was like, okay, I'll keep an eye out first and just see. And then just more and more I was spotting that there is an overrepresentation of people who can press fast or get it quicker. And it's kind of interesting if you look at what happens in the mechanics of the press, because it looks like the elbow, when you configure it for the handstand, it looks like the elbow moves backwards slightly. And what happens is it seems to reduce the shoulder flexion demand by an equal amount of degrees in the elbow, whatever the elbow is bending. So if it's 15 degrees, imagine. So greater than 15 degrees is a clinical representation of this. And so if you have 15 degrees at the elbow, it reduces the demand on your shoulder flexion 15 degrees, it seems, to get stacked above the base of support. So that in turn means you are in closer to the mid-range of your shoulder flexors. So this will get you into the press faster. Yeah, I think. It also means like the bases, not the base support, the center of mass actually gets a bit lower over the hands. So then it's easier to press it up.
Yeah, and like as we've talked about before, since, I mean, a requirement for good active shoulder flexion is good passive shoulder flexion. And it might mean that you kind of get away with having less shoulder, like absolute shoulder flexion for doing these certain things if you have this type of elbow structure. So like the way it kind of looks often, if you look at people from the side, I have a few pictures that I will link for this in the transcript, where like it looks like the person is bending their arms, while it is not so. It has nothing to do with the bent arm. This is the expression of their straight arm in the handstand position. Like the pictures that I'll link are with locked elbows. It's just that in this configuration, like it looks like they're bending, and like that's also why I've been thinking about this with the pressing, since it kind of achieves, in one sense, it kind of achieves the same for the press as bending your arms do, slightly being able to bring your shoulders more forwards. So that's one thing that I've been thinking about, that it actually might be a contributing factor. So, but then again, that being said, there's tons of people that learn to press really fast. I don't have particularly, like, I have a slight amount of this, but it's insignificant, and I learned to press fast. So, and in my case, it has nothing really to do with that, more with strong shoulder flexion, which you anyway will need to have. It's just we're talking about small contributing or possibly contributing factors here.
You need to make another video on your Gollum presses.
I can do that.
The other thing I suppose we want to move on to is shoulders. Like, shoulders come in all these different configurations, shapes, sizes. Shoulder width, the acromial width, like how wide your shoulders are from the side, has a lot of variance. And it was one of these it's one of these things I've noticed as well, that depending, the shoulder width can have a big play on the amount of elevation we need to configure the shoulders and into the arrangement we want for a handstand, for a straight line handstand in particular. Because if you don't have any hyperextension, your shoulders are quite wide, your hand placement, even if you elevate, I'm kind of doing it now, your hand placement will be much wider than another person's. Whereas it'll look like in some ways when you sink into this position and push out, that you're not actually elevating as high as if someone who was in a narrower position. So it's one of these kind of tricks of the eyes things where it's like you'll have the same degree, but because the arms have more spacing, it looks like they're further from the ear. This comes in when a lot of people are like, get your shoulders to your ear, get your shoulders to your ear. And you can almost see this in like one arm positions as well, when like the people who do it, who have this wide shoulder, they end up bending the head quite far to the side to get it to touch the ear. That's what I have to do, for example. Like, if I'm going to put my head by my arm to do a one arm, I need to make a specific correction of my entire handstand by moving the head, because pushing so high that the arm goes to my head, it practically doesn't work. I will like, if I push to the absolute max, I will still have to either then move the shoulder, like kind of tilt the arm out to the side and bring the head in. So it always feels like a less practical position for me. And like, I was just speaking with about that with a friend of mine, Sami Dinin here, yesterday or the day before, I think. And he has like that's also elbow though, but he has a very hyperextended elbow, or at least quite hyperextended elbow. And when he does like the legs together, arm up position, I mentioned this before, like he doesn't need to have a lot of diagonal in the body at all. And it kind of almost looks as if his hand is almost under his face when he does it, due to the extra angle that the hyperextension of the elbow can allow him to comfortably be in. I've tried a few times to kind of like, I remember once I took a picture of his one arm and I tried to replicate the position he was in, and I was filming it. And to me, like, it doesn't just look bad. It looks like I don't know what I'm doing at all, because like my body can't go there without me having kind of like a diagonal from the shoulder down to the hand by quite a substantial degree. So it's kind of funny, like how these things express. I think it's one of those ones just with, I know Sammy was in circus school with him, and he's quite like tall and narrow. He's quite tall for a hand balancer. And whereas like if you look at Mikael, just something, you're quite like broad across the shoulders. You have quite a wide shoulder angle. So it would be a good comparison of people who are kind of equalish skill levels. And just like sure. Mikael can't configure, I'm sure Sammy couldn't configure his shoulders into your one in the same position.
No, probably not. Same. Like it would probably be as uncomfortable or almost as uncomfortable for him to do what I do as it is for me to do what he does, I think.
Yeah, it's the same. Like I have that similar shoulders and elbows as Sammy. It's like I can just touch my ear without even elevating my shoulder. It just goes there, like I'm just sort of demoing the thing. Whereas, you know, Mikael, if he puts his arms up, there's like an orange space between his head. Yeah, like it's so funny to try to do those positions for me in that sense, because like it's miserable. But yes, speaking about like the shoulders, and you mentioned the acromion and stuff like that before. I pulled up a couple of pictures once when I was reading about
Yeah, these kind of anatomical variations, because elbows are just some of them. Like, but the funny thing is that like this, you could probably kind of replicate these variations with almost any bones in the body. And of course, like the most significant bone differences in bodies are of course like larger things that like kind of everyone knows about, such as like differences between male and female pelvis and kind of the femurs of male and females that are like kind of genetically slightly different. But there's tons of these like small ones that we can't see or like have no idea about. And I was reading about like the scapula, of course, because it's so relevant to the handstand. And I found these pictures that we'll also be linking in the transcript. So I urge you to take a look at those pictures right now, and you scroll halfway down the website there, and you will find a couple of pictures of some scapula. It's basically bone parts there, and what you see is just like, if you look at the upper right picture of the two scapulas there,
and you check this out. To pause you there at the top of the page, we're on the Paul Grilly, who's a yin yoga teacher, but he says, please feel free to download and use these images for educational presentations and lectures. I think that counts on us. So
definitely
we'll put a link to Paul Grilly and say thank you for sharing these pictures, and we'll just whip the photos from now on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But so these two scapulas, I mean, if you look at the, like, it's funny because when I look at them, like, if I didn't know what I was looking at, I wouldn't necessarily be sure that these were the two same bones, even, because like the acromion sizes are massively different. On one of them, you wouldn't even see the supraspinatus kind of, while in the other, you would have it in plain view. So like this doesn't like these kind of differences are the types that like there is no way for us to make any significant assumptions about what this would cause or if it could cause anything. But what we can assume is that there is something to be said for these two things, not necessarily, or like that variations upon technique might be a good approach. So that is essentially the things that we want to come out from this. Not that you need to do the one thing or the other depending on your body, or not that you're talented or not, but that it might be smart to rethink the idea that there is only one certain way of doing things, if it is so that body parts are different within different people, which they are.
Yeah, we don't just have a gross morphology that is a bit different, but there is just internal things. We can have two people of the same size and stature. I remember, I think it was Greg Everett in his book on Olympic weightlifting, but I'm not certain, where he was comparing two lifters he happened to know, or some other weightlifting text, and he was comparing these two lifters, and there were two females at the same size, same weight class, lifting about the same weight as far as I can remember, and he just put them side to side and shot them from the back, and you could see one of them, her legs were like, basically her ass would have been on equal with the person's sacrum on the other side, if that puts thoughts, and she obviously had a shorter torso to compensate. So you can see, like, just, gross morphology, there's these big differences you can see from the outside when you can compare people, but then inside it's just like nonsense sometimes in terms of what can be different and what has to compensate for those differences. Just, it's one of these ones, possibly detrimental one, because I see it in front of me now, is the acromion. Now, the acromion process, there is between 3 and 5 different types, depending on which textbook you pick up on this. And I had this explained to me by a physio very early in my days of training. Type 1 acromion, you only had 3 in his classification system. Type 1 acromion, you have no problems. Type 1 is straight. Type 2, curved. You have shoulder problems every now and then. Type 3, hooked, where it's coming right over. You have shoulder problems all the time. Now, this is kind of interesting, just from the basis that it's also like, we have to remember that the body and bones and everything is a form of connective tissue that responds to stress. There's some evidence, I'm not sure how strong this is, I'm sure there's some physios who will jump down my throat, that you can actually make the acromion process adapt via working overhead. A lot of people who just don't work overhead, either weightlifting, hanging, chin-ups, these should have been part of our development, I suppose, and with the shoulder being the first weight-loading joint of the body, apparently, or at least in locomotion, if we think of babies crawling, that if we don't do enough of these activities, the acromion doesn't get enough stimulus, so it needs to adapt, and it ends up being a type 3. Whether that's right or not, I don't know, but I've heard of a few places. And it's kind of interesting that it's if you take up, some people say hanging, and there is some MRI images you can see of the changes of doing hanging for 4 to 5 months, and that will force the acromion to straighten out a bit from a type 3 to type 2 or type 2 to type 1. And this kind of adaptation is still possible. So even if you have these bone structures, things can be changed. And this is one of these things that were very interesting, I suppose, for what's the long-term effect of like standing on our hands so much? Like,
yeah, I've thought a lot about that the last couple of years, now that I'm not 22 anymore. That's like, like my left elbow used to hyperextend. Like on all my old videos from 10 years ago, my left elbow is hyperextending to a decent degree. Now it's not, and I have found that when I hang from a bar, I can feel quite a significant stretch in my elbow. It feels kind of as just like I described to Emmett here the other day. It feels kind of like, to use Rodney Mullen's metaphor, it feels like dried gum kind of being pulled apart. So I've started to hang a little bit and see if that does anything. But it's interesting because it used to be a pronounced hyperextension, and it is practically gone. And I wouldn't be surprised if this has to do with me absolutely decimating my elbows by jumping around on the hands every single day for a number of years. Yeah. And obviously my body is trying to deal with this, which it has done very well. I don't have significant elbow issues. I also can't bend my arms a lot. That's maybe the most interesting part. I cannot touch my shoulder with the hand in any way, shape, or form. And
it's just because your biceps are so big.
No, that's the funny part. It's not even because there isn't any stop in the biceps section. It's like it's around the tricep area, and my triceps are, of course, extremely stiff. But I remember very, very clearly when I started circus over 10 years ago. Then I would do some partner acrobatics where we would just do this girl would stand on my shoulders, then she would step into one of my hands and then step into the other, and then we were in foot to hand. No big deal. And a few years ago, I tried to do this step method with an extremely light girl. She is tiny. She weighs 43 kilos or something, and I couldn't. And I was just like, why can't I hold her? This used to be extremely easy 10 years ago when I was much weaker. And then I just looked into but hey, I can't get my hand close enough to my body to get her into any efficient angle whatsoever. I literally had to have her out in some sort of jank bicep curl stupid position to be able to push and hold her. So it wasn't doable. And it's like nowadays, I did some paracro like a year ago, and then it improved significantly again. I put a lot of stress onto the arm and elbow in that position, and it did improve. But I definitely need to stick to that to be able to keep the change, of course.
Yeah, it's definitely on the elbow note. Actually, I have the opposite issue. So on elbows, so I don't have a hint of hypermobility in my body. I have the exact opposite type. Flexibility does not come easy to me as a thing. That's why I know so much and why I spent so long researching it, because I was like, I have to find something that works for me, or at least back in the day. But elbows, I've managed to develop a significant degree of hyperextension in my elbows deliberately. Because when I was training circuits for quite a decent amount of time, and I got to the third year of circuit school, and I was like, okay, I want to figure out how to learn handstands and learn one arms and stuff like that. It's a bit of a side project. I could hand balance fine, press fine, Stalder, all these things fine, but I couldn't one arm. So I was like, okay, I'll put the work in. I was talking to someone who I respected, who I can't remember right now, and they're like, you have to be able to hyperextend in the elbows or you won't be able to one arm. So I was like, well, my arm goes straight, it doesn't go the other way. I'm fucked. So I took a method that I learned from the circus school in San Francisco, where I got this via a friend, I think, at the time, or where did it come from? It came from there anyway. It came from the Chinese coaches who I met later on. And the idea was that they do it for everything. Hyperextended elbows, hyperextended knees, the lot. And what they would do would be, say, the easiest one to describe, and you would sit down in a pike against the wall with your toes pointed up on a couple of yoga blocks. Then you'd get some 10-pound sandbags, 5 kilos for the Europeans, and you'd put them on 3 times a week, 2-3 times a week, and you'd sit there for 10-15 minutes at a time. So I proceeded to do the same thing with my elbows, and a few months later I was like, anyone see my elbows now, like it's quite significant degree of hyperextension they've developed. So joints can be changed, and I have experienced it directly.
Yeah, I mean, there's of course a certain limit on how much, but like the fact that, I mean, the body responds to forces. That is something that we know. And speaking of that, like, I mean, now we mentioned a few things in terms of just like bones, of course, scapula, elbows, spines are of course different, hips, everything is it's kind of easier to imagine that the bones are different, at least it was to me, than muscles. But then, like, I started completely randomly. I Googled latissimus dorsi because I wanted to read something about latissimus dorsi probably in some Wikipedia loop or Sleepless Night or something.
It's gone off the Sarabomba.
Yeah. Yeah, Sarbomba is usually what I read about, or two-stage Teller Eula nuclear weapons designs.
Do a Sarbomba show.
Yeah, there isn't that. I've already read everything there is on Sarbomba.
I know, so you do a presentation on it and everyone will be like, here's a deep insight into Mikhail's mind.
Yeah, that's when the darkness strikes. But yeah, so I Googled latissimus dorsi and I just clicked to Wikipedia to just, maybe I was checking insertions or something. And then I look a little bit down the page and suddenly it says variations. And I'm like, hey, variations? What do you mean variations? It's just one of the biggest muscles in the upper body and it pulls the arm down and so on. And then suddenly I see that, hey, it suddenly says here that the latissimus dorsi crosses the inferior angle of the scapula. A study found that of 100 cadavers dissected, 43% had a substantial amount of muscle fibers in the latissimus dorsi originating from the scapula. 36% had few or no muscular fibers, but a soft fibrous link between the scapula and the latissimus dorsi. 21% had little or no connecting tissue between the two structures. And then I went like, what? So for 43% of people, they have muscle fibers from the lats to the scapula, and the rest literally do not have significant muscle fibers connecting there at all. And it just basically blew my mind. Like, and this is just speaking of one single muscle. And again, we can't extrapolate what this means for hand balancing practice or for other muscles and so on. But it definitely says something that, like, it's not set in stone exactly how these things connect within our bodies. And I am pretty certain that these things can also be contributing to what we call talent, in the sense that, like, certain structures favor certain movements, which is an obvious thing. And again, this is not something to go home and boo-hoo, my scapula does not connect to my latissimus dorsi, I shall never do a pull-up again. It's not about that, but it's about understanding what variations actually exist.
Yeah, it's definitely one of these things. I say this phrase a lot to people because, well, I get a lot of people coming for flexibility training, obviously. And I get people who are interested in becoming contortionists. And in my mind, contortionists are born. You don't make a contortionist. Now, you can train a contortionist. The person has the capabilities now, just to clear some stuff up. You can get immensely flexible. You can get really good bridges, oversplits, really good pancakes, all this stuff. But contortion, particularly the high-level backbending, just has something else that is just basically, if you don't have it, you can't train it. And I think a lot of it comes down to the spinal processes, where, like, the vertebra size, the size of your vertebra, and when they start to jam up, as well as, like, hypermobility of the tissues on the spinal column. Like, a spinal column is it's more like a rigid tube of, like, muscles and connective tissue surrounding the bones. And all these kind of things, like, there's just like this hard limit obviously, of just how flexible you get, and you can't train past it for a lot of people. So it's, as I say, the talent to be a proper contortionist. When I think contortionist, I'm thinking like someone who has the potential to learn like a Marinelli bend. So when you back bend and you sit on your own head when you're biting a pipe, or these kind of advanced straight leg head sits and stuff like this. You'd be able to get, as an interesting one, like say a chin stand. You can get a lot of people who can get their feet to the ground in a chin stand, but there'll just be a limit of like how much, like even I at certain points could get my feet to the ground in a chin stand, like, but there's not a chance I'd be able to sit on my own head. You know, so there is these kind of encoded bony hard limits in flexibility as well.
Yeah, and then like it's like just like you speak about there, like when you reach those upper kind of crazier levels of thing, just like not everyone can run as fast as Usain Bolt. Like it just won't happen. Everyone can run faster, so they can get really good at what they do, but it's just there's a certain kind of the upper levels of things. Obviously, stuff like talent will start to matter, just as if you want to be the best at ring gymnastics in the world and you weigh 90 kilos, well, you're not going to be the best at ring gymnastics in the world. It's literally that simple. Whereas understanding the basis where these things come from in terms of these inner pieces as well, I think is interesting, and just something that is barely ever spoken about. And it's very obvious why they're not spoken about, because it's really hard to cut someone open. Like it's not something you just go and do.
Really? You don't go and do that?
At least you don't tell anyone about it.
Why do you think Mikkel lives in Sweden and Norway? It's to save on the freezer bills.
But so like and like obviously you can't really do these kind of studies either on athletes, since I mean I assume that only doing imaging might not be enough on a lot of these things, since like as they refer to in the article on the Wikipedia one, that like they dissected cadavers to be able to ascertain these variations.
And it's definitely one of these things as well of I suppose if people are into a bit of coaching or keeping up with sort of pain science research, there's a trend called victims of medical imaging. And it's when a simple example is like you have back pain and you go to your doctor and he goes, oh, you have to see an orthopedic specialist. And the orthopedic specialist does an MRI in your back and goes, oh, you have a blown out disc, a prolapsed disc in your back. That is the cause of your pain. We must operate and fix it. But it's only because they can see something wrong, they attribute that. Whereas if they started doing studies on like MRIs of healthy young people over a certain age, and like I think 80% of them had evidence of past spinal prolapses that had fixed and been asymptomatic. Yeah. So it's this kind of thing. If we started attributing like, oh, if your biacromial width is this wide, you will be good at hand balancing, or you won't be able to make it. Then obviously we're introducing some kind of nocibic effect.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is a really important one that I've also noticed. I mean, I'm not a health and fitness expert at all, but latest today, I even downloaded that picture. It's the most janky bullshit I've ever seen. It was basically from some sort of physio page, where there was a question: do you sit on your wallet, or do you sit with your wallet in your back pocket? And then there was like a picture of a person sitting on their ass with no wallet in the back pocket, then the same person sitting with a wallet in the back pocket, and then the person kind of jamming their ass up and sitting with their back in a very funky position due to this wallet being in the back pocket. And then they had put a picture of a spine on the back of these two bodies, one with a nice and straight spine and the other with a spine that's crooked and bent, and kind of attributing this kind of like as if sitting with the wallet in your back pocket is kind of a significant contributor to back pain, because the spine doing this slight bend that it did on the picture, which I'm sure is like not even noticeable if you're actually sitting, because even if a wallet is thick, you're not going to move 10 centimeters to the side, and just like your body is resilient and adaptable and likely able to sit on its ass, even though one ass cheek is slightly higher. And like
just train one side of the hip thrusts to balance it out. I like to keep my wallet in my left pocket, so I train hip thrusts only on the right leg, and that keeps my ass in shape.
Like I remember that there was this one really nice quote, like, or two really nice quotes that I can't remember where I got them from, but there was some pain science related stuff, and one was that the best posture is your next one, which I really like, because I mean, if you sit on your couch right now listening to our podcast, for example, you're probably slouching. Good. And within 5 minutes, you will probably have changed position like once or twice or so. Like your body can do this. Your body can deal with this.
I like to think most people who listen to our podcast are training handstands. We get tagged in a lot of people going,
yeah, I've noticed that too. Why are you training handstands?
I hope you stay longer and you're not getting distracted. Pay attention. And if you're listening in a handstand right now, point your fucking toes or flex your toes. Do something with them.
Don't fall, at least.
Don't fall.
Yeah. Don't make me ashamed. And I just need to mention that other quote as well before I forget. The other quote was that, like, you can see who's in pain by who is sitting upright. And that one I really liked. Like, the idea, of course, like, it's not great to sit and slouch all the time, but I think, like you said, the nocibic effect of imagining that, like, the body is this kind of like glass castle that you need to protect at all costs, and if you do something wrong, then you're going to break it. And I think that's a little bit the same idea with hand balancing and acrobatic practices too, that there is this like very strong idea that if you do everything correct, you'll never be injured, or that like incorrect training form or posture is the only reason why you get injured, while there's like an enormous amount of individual factors that you can kind of basically you can never know exactly what is going on.
It's one of those ones you'd like to like rate the people on their form technician skills and then track their injury progress over 5 years and see, but then again, form is subjective. Form is objective, but glory lasts forever, so perform the triple. We should get back onto anatomy. So
yes, correct.
The side bending thing, this one's quite interesting as well.
Oh, yeah.
So what side bending is one of these things that comes up as quite a limitation, and it's torso length, but length of the rib cage. And people can have extra ribs or be missing ribs, like the floating ribs. They have little riblets. It's kind of funny. We'll try to find a picture for the transcript as well. But even just the spacing you can feel between the top of your pelvis. Remember, pelvises come in different shape as well. They can be higher up or lower down. And these can be contributors to your success in like side bending in handstands, where you're like, okay, if I go sideways, if I feel like the bottom of my rib to my pelvis, you should have about a hand width there. Some people can have like nearly double that, and some people can be much closer. And this just becomes like one of these uncomfortable bone limits when you side bend. And it just feels like your own ribs are stabbing you in some organs. And it just limits like literally how deep you can get into the bend. So this is one of the ones you see quite commonly. It's like you have, even at advanced levels, you have someone who's a very good balancer and they just can't side bend as nicely as someone else. And that's not even counting the lumbar spine and what's going on in there. So, you know, it's one of these things. There's some tricks to get around it that I've picked up over the years of like trying to let the pelvis go over the ribs so they kind of compress them inwards. And that one works, but it's been responsible for a few broken floating ribs every now and then. I know more than a couple of people have broken their ribs that way. It will. There's one particular school that will remain unnamed, but you need to sort out your side bending skills. If you're listening, you know who you are. If you have more than 2 broken floating ribs in a year, you know who you are. Other than that, and then the other one is that the pelvis goes inside the ribs and kind of shifts down, and that one you end up squishing your own liver to get around it, but it still does not give you the same bend as if you have a lot of space for the lumbar to conform around. So it's kind of one of these things, like if you want to be great at side bending, you better roll that dice for the reincarnation.
Yeah, like my side bending is fine, but it's not great. Like if I do a full flag, and I bend as deep as I can. Like I will, and I keep my arm like completely close to my face. I will never ever make it to 90 degrees flat. Like I've tried this. I even tried it like holding onto a bar where I then have all the like more than all the power I need to keep the arm perfectly by my ear. But as I come to like, it gets close to vertical, but or close to horizontal. But for me to reach the horizontal line, I need to move the hand away from the head. I can either do that with a straight arm, or I can bend the elbow, and I can reach the kind of pretty flat shape of it. But if I do not do either, it is not going to happen, and it's not a discussion of more bending, because like I feel the limit on, like, it doesn't hurt in the bones, but there isn't more to be done there. I even tried this with ankle weights to have something to pull me down more, and like I was filming it from the exact same angle, and it was like virtually the exact same thing. Like there wouldn't be anywhere further that I could go with that. While the funny thing is, like, you'll see, like you say, so much variation on this. Some barely bend at all in the side and do it a lot in like moving the arm away. And then you have, like, for example, some of those Mongolian contortionists. There's this one called Azaya or something. We'll link her Instagram. She's one of the most flexible I've ever seen in that regard. Of course, her contortion is top notch as well, and she's an insane hand balancer. But she bends so much in the side. Like, she puts her opposite hip on her shoulder, like the ass is on the shoulder, and it just looks like, when I kind of try to imagine that in my body, it's just like, no, but like there isn't, like I would have to remove like 1/5 of my upper body to be able to get into that position, and that would mean a lot of blood and gore. So I kind of skipped that, learning that.
I can happily do that for you. We'll come over.
Bring the axe.
Bring some pre-workout. Bring the axe. We'll get you into the position. It kind of, if you look at the position, she's almost bended herself into a Mobius strip. Yeah. It's just like, even at the high, like, that's the kind of thing, even at, you see this a lot of high-level contortion. You see, like, certain contortionists have, like, their power moves that they're flexing on other contortionists that they can just do, and no one else can. And it's down to some kind of these weird things. It's always that idea of what I always find interesting myself is, like, particularly when a country decides that a certain thing is their thing, and then pulls all the talent pool in the country just based on the population, and suddenly is like smoking everyone. So Mongolian and contortion is a classic one in circus, because they just have it's just an art form over there. It's a very respected kind of thing that your kids might do instead of doing dance classes or something like that. So they get a talent pool from which, like, suddenly at the upper echelons, people are rising out who are just like immensely good. You see that with like other sports, like a country decides, okay, wrestling is our sport, and then suddenly they're like a small country, say like Bulgaria, and they're smoking everyone at wrestling and these kind of things. Whereas you think, oh, bigger countries would, might do it, but no. Talent pool gets focused in one direction. You have like selection of the best traits for this thing. Yeah, and of course, like you said, the talent pool. It's really important to remember that, like, again, speaking about the best of the best, you will then tend to get the people, or like the best ones will gravitate towards continuing with it, and so on and so on. They'll start when they're young, blah blah blah, and of course, it'll be the people with kind of all these strange variations of human bodies that end up doing these things at the higher levels but of course, like, hard training and all that means an enormous significant amount of it. And I mean, me having started circus at 23 years old, like, it was doable. I mean, I could never get as good as the guys who started way younger. It's not a discussion. Like, the amount of training hours that I could put in with quality between 22 and my mid 30s is kind of like, I could get a lot done, but you could get a lot more done with fewer hours if you're a child, and that is entirely fine. That is just something to, I think it's one of the reasons why I wanted to make this kind of episode, is because it's really the opposite of kind of having a discouraging kind of, oh, you shouldn't do this because you don't have a talent. No, it's not that. It's just, I think it's important to
know what kind of things exist, so that we're not like running around in a fairy tale world thinking that like, oh yeah, I'm going to become the best in the world. Like it's not productive.
Yeah.
Like,
but you might be.
It's,
that's the thing.
You might be, but it's and I mean it's good to have that kind of passion and drive and all that, but it's good to also understand where these things are coming from, so that like we're having kind of a discussion about reality and like not fairy tale land.
Yeah, it's definitely it's the case, I suppose, for trying to make is there's a case that all handstands must look exactly the same, and that if you don't conform to this form, which is you're a bad person, or you're not achieving the goal of the handstand, even though you might be holding your handstand for 50-60 seconds. No, you can always strive. Like the line itself is even if we're talking about the bone adaptation, say the stuff I had personally going on, say with the elbows and stuff, my line, if I picked up when I was in circus school, able to blast out handstands, no problem, to when I adapted the elbows and everything, is I'm a new person, like from just my own personal experience. And this kind of thing of like, I suppose it's just, we try to, I think coaches have this idea of like looking, maybe not all coaches, obviously, I don't want to be disparaging, but there can be a trend for people who are maybe not specialized hand balance coaches to think that everything has to look the same. It must be this alignment, it must be this, it must be straight. And it kind of, a lot of this, we have to recognize the roots of it comes from gymnastics coaching. And, you know, gymnastics coaching is aimed for children. They have a certain aesthetic based on children. The people who reach the high level of gymnastics, say particularly women, they're generally wider on the shoulders and narrower in the hips than an average woman. Just generally, not in every single case, and particularly at the Olympic level. So then we still get a bias that this is the best shaped body for this, in the exact same way that like being 7 foot tall with 7'10" arms is, it's probably about 3 meters, I think, for the Europeans, is the best shape for playing basketball. So there is body types that are better for these kind of acrobatic disciplines. But the interesting thing is, you see more variation of the body types, particularly say in gymnastics, and obviously something I'm interested in, at the university level, because you'll get girls who are really good and they maybe not Olympic material, but then they start having growth spurts when they hit university level, and their hips get wider, you know, get bigger asses, bigger thighs, you know, just from training and whatever, and then they have a different physique shape than what we're used to seeing as performed as the upper echelons. They're still damn good, like they're still busting doubles and shit like this. But what happens, and it's one of those things that I picked up on through my own misfortune and own unknowing 10, 12 years ago, was I was working as a PT, and I was coaching women. Normal, like my main clientele were women, and I'd say 35 to 45 would have been the kind of average age. Generally not super fit, but not in bad shape, you know, just general office workers who have an interest in health, is the easiest way to describe it. And I was trying to get them to do dish holds, or straight body holds, or hollow body holds, whatever you want to call them. And lots of them who were a bit more curvy shaped, not fat or anything like that, just curvy. They just couldn't get the lumbar spine flat on the ground. And, you know, for me, it was like, there must be, you know, one of the key things was always drilled in all the training I had was like the lumbar spine must be flat on the ground as hard as possible. So you'd be getting them to sit in these big, like, curved banana shapes to get this flatness on the lumbar spine. And it was just like, for me, like, I had to have a strong feeling on the dish hold with the big curved canoe kind of shape, and the actual straight body hold that we want to use for hand balance. And I was like, no, this isn't it. So I would start just feeling the lumbar spine. You could feel that they were flexing the lumbar spines pretty hard and posteriorly tilting the pelvis. What was happening is they just had more mass, more muscles on their asses that was going backwards. And they just like,
so
for them,
they
couldn't get flat, but it wasn't that like their spine wasn't in the right configuration I wanted. It's just that like they had muscle and ass, and it was just like causing a bit of a speed bump. So they couldn't do hollow body rocks properly. And I was thinking they were bad people because they couldn't do these with bad form. But then turns out I was the bad person because I was trying to make them...
I was the bad person.
I hate it when I'm wrong, but it was one of these hard learning experiences. I mean, not a hard one, but it was like when I figured it out, I was like, yeah. But But then it's, it would manifest in these people's handstands as well. It's like they are straight. And you see this a bit online when the shoulder position is good and everything is stacked. The bones, if you project an image of the bone into the person where you roughly think it is, you can see the skeleton is straight, but the butt is sticking out, and it looks like the lower back is curved, but it's not. It's flat. Not in every case. There's no excuse to curve your lower back, but it's one of these things to watch out for, particularly if you're a coach and you're thinking like it must be straight line. It's like, no, we're looking at the straight line through the body, not the straight line at the back of the body.
Yeah, and like there's also this notion that like we've talked about before, which I still find this fascinating, just in terms of this. If we take these variations of bodies and then speak about technique then, and these ideas that like you have to do a certain or follow a certain standard that is set by largely a sport, which is gymnastics, that has set a lot of the criteria for the aesthetics, and gymnastics had a lot of its roots in terms of the aesthetics based on ballet again, which has to do with a certain form of presentation, a certain aesthetic that is culturally constructed. But what is fascinating is that I love to compare this with breaking, since that's where I came from and all that I mentioned before. But I think it's really cool to see how the extreme difference there of like, I see so many people like, you want to learn a straight handstand, the straight, and like the straight kind of becomes a symbol of value. That's what I find fascinating. Like, I can do the straight handstand. I am straight, which means that I now project value. Like, I can be one of the people that can do the straight, and that is kind of the parameter that we're trying to kind of satisfy. And we're trying so hard to adapt the body to sort to this technique. While if you also look at just the variation, both actually in gymnastics and in circus and so on, like of course there's like loads of new material developed and like people are doing new things with it. But if you look at just handstand wise now, like in terms of various movements and things you can do on the hands, this kind of aesthetical framework, I feel, is like it becomes oppressive in the sense that it dictates us to work in a very specific way all the time. And I found this video here a few days ago. Just it's just to juxtapose. It's not. I'm not saying that circus or gymnastics need to move in this direction, but it's a b-boy called Elvis something from Russia who just does some like kind of air baby crocodile or like baby freeze kind of combination movements that is just, it is absolutely absurd, and both kind of technically in terms of complexity and difficulty and all this, it is absolutely nuts what he does in this one video. We'll link it in the description, but it's just the amount of sheer variation that comes out of this perspective when you're not trying to change your body to the technique. You're rather just seeing, okay, so what works for my body, and then you swap around the technique to that. Again, not saying that circus needs to do that, but there's certainly an interesting thing to see what happens when you kind of let people free with that. Yeah,
I think it's one of those things that I'm bringing my more advanced students through this process at the moment of trying to get rid of the technique. We're just trying to go, well, we have all our classic hand balance shapes, but now I'm trying to like go, well, like, let's make some new shapes. Let's make a whole act. One student I'm working on at the moment is we're trying to make a whole act with the goal would be to have no shapes out of the classic repertoire in there and no transitions from the classic repertoire. So just trying to find like his own voice in this process is kind of interesting and frustrating because he has quite high level technique, is Josh. So he has quite high level technique. He can do all the basic repertoires to a certain degree. But then it's like, well, where can we take it? What can we do with it? And it's definitely
speaking of that, again, another mention in the transcript for these, check out Imogen Hustle, because she's the queen of doing weird thingies with her handstands, and they are weird and they're fucking awesome.
I think Imogen had a cool one where she was just bending and extending her elbows in time to beat.
She does a lot of that stuff, and also like her one arm positions are just like, I mean, she can do the things, like she can do all of the classic shapes. She's great, but like she chooses to move in a completely different way, and something that is very noticeable that it's her, because it's such a kind of course the shapes are there, but it's about kind of the movement quality and kind of the mood that gets added into it, because she chooses not to just do like, hey, I do a straight leg here, look how pretty my straight leg is. It's exactly as pretty as this other person's exactly straight leg. So it's a little bit in that kind of
it's an interesting time.
Valuing other things kind of.
Yeah, this is where I suppose all the uniqueness of your body begins to come into play, because it's like, oh, I can't flag exactly in the exact same shape because I stabbed myself in the liver with my own bones, but I found that I can actually flag in some weird twisted thing that relies on me having to put my shoulders in a strange position that then suddenly no one else can actually replicate. And this is where things get cool for me. It's just like, oh, you can take your base repertoire and your base skills. So I always think of like all the basic shapes for whatever you work on. It's like playing scales in classical music or any sort of instrument. You need to learn your scales. And then like I think when people are linking them and doing classic sequences, it's like playing songs. You're like learning to play Wonderwall, and then you learn to play Metallica, and you learn to play better things. And is there anything better in Metallica? I don't know. But then eventually it's like, oh, well, maybe I need to write my own songs. Maybe I need to play the guitar in weird ways. And that's what's kind of, I think we're beginning to hit this point in circus as well. There's a lot of like, there was this kind of uniqueness trend, I suppose, back in the day, to be the only person who could do such a thing. And that was the thing. Cool. And like a lot of it did rely on people having weird joints. We were just on, what was the name of that Instagram account I shared with you today?
Can't remember, but it was pretty damn good.
Yeah, I'll find it and I'll put it in the comments. It's just like old time American carny and circus and carnivals and all these kind of things. There's a lot of people with unique bodies were making quite a high living back in the day. It's kind of have a lot of people billed as freaks and geeks and all these kind of things. And, be people who have medical conditions that would be treated nowadays. But they were, back in the history of these things, these vaudeville performances and these people, they were very high paid, like really high paid. So
yeah, a lot of the sideshow stuff.
Yeah. So that kind of uniqueness, then it kind of got lost a bit in circus. That it was, it was just kind of pushed away for kind of almost homogenization of the technique, because it was like people have pushed the skill to a certain level. But now the skill is dispersed. Basically, I'm very convinced, like anyone who wants to come and learn a one-arm handstand, give me enough time, you will have a one-arm handstand, no matter the starting point. We understand the techniques. Same with like trapeze, silks, anything you want to learn.
Yeah, you can get pretty good.
Juggling, anything, you can get pretty good. But then people have realized then it kind of got a bit homogenous. The Cirque du Soleileification, I suppose, of circus, they called it. So then people are like trying to find their own voice now with these skills. So they have like a classical musician trying to play jazz, I suppose, is a good analogy there.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that is also where ultimately all these, the variation both perhaps makes sense and doesn't, in the way that like ultimately when you, or if you choose to do the things that maybe work for you or that you find interesting with it, then maybe it doesn't matter whether or not you can do the fancy pants exactly movement that is kind of highly valued by the community, or how to say. So I think that there's certainly a like something to be said for that, especially when it comes to an art form that like no one bothers more than a few times to see the same balance or the same flip, while if you have something more kind of a flavor to add to it, that makes it so that like you can actually both in terms of the work, I find that like that plays a significant role in terms of people actually wanting you to work, while also just for inspiration and someone that's just like infinitely chasing the highest skills, like there is this very serious diminishing return for that. And that's something I've felt like very much the last years. Is okay, I've done most of the things Like, I know what things I can get slightly better at. I know the things that I'll never be able to do. And I know the things I don't really care to be able to do. And there becomes more and more of those, like, yeah, I don't really care to be able to do this, because like the feeling is going to be largely the same as by the last 8,000 things I learned to do. So then you kind of like start looking for other criteria for your practice, I guess.
Do origami in a handstand.
Yeah, everyone's like, do origami in handstand. It's like, do you realize how hard it is to flat fold paper with one hand, sitting down on the couch?
I wasn't thinking
really
with like
hard.
your hands. I'm thinking with your feet.
Fuck that.
I think anyone listening,
I can tie a rope with my feet.
Yeah,
and that's where it stops. I've been trying to fold paper standing in a handstand. So the problem is that flat folding the paper, you need two hands, or at least you need a flat surface underneath you. So I mean, it should technically be possible to fold a bird or something, you know, on the floor in handstand. But like when I speed fold a bird from a 4 centimeter square, which goes really fast, it takes me about a minute sitting. So doing that in a handstand is going to take several minutes. It'll just be a pain in the ass.
You're just gonna have to get faster, really. You can either get better at handstands, or you can get better at folding.
Then I need to train endurance.
Yeah,
I don't want to train endurance.
No sets lasting a minute with Mikael. If you're not into training endurance but want to get good at handstands, train with Mikael. If you like training a bit of endurance, I'll give you some. And there's some coaches out there who will give you a lot. If you want to do a lot of endurance, go to China, where the world...
Oh, yeah.
What's the Chinese rule? I think they've eased it up for the Westerners who go to the Beijing Art School, but it was back in the day, you have to be able to do 30 or 40 minutes chest wall handstand before they let you train one arms.
Yeah, like my friend who was there said they were very rough to the Chinese kids, but not to them. They were beaten with sticks when they went down to their heads to rest in the stomach to wall handstand.
Yeah, I think the Chinese character also contains the character for bamboo. So it's got the idea of a stick in there as well. Now, maybe some sinophiles will be able to tell me if I'm right or wrong on that, but I've heard it through the grapevine. I think we should wrap it up there.
Definitely.
Yeah. So basically, moral of the story is your body is completely unique on the inside, and there has never been one like it before. Maybe there has. Who knows? Statistically, probably not. We can't tell you what's going on, but there's likely some things you can do, and there's likely some things you can't do. And eventually you will have to adapt the technique to your body and not your body to the technique.
To some degree or other.
Yeah.
And try the best you can to do things nicely as you want them to do. But yeah, don't beat yourself up if it isn't picture perfect.
Yeah, exactly. And anyway, if you would like to learn how to handstand and learn the principles we teach from beginner to advanced, we have our courses at handstandfactory.com. And if you want to ask us some questions for our minisodes where we will answer all your questions, you can send them to us on social media, on either my Instagram, Mikael's Instagram, or the Handstand Factory Instagram, as well as on anchor.fm. If you find our page there, which we link, you can leave us voice messages, which is cool, and we'll definitely play them. And you can also leave us voice answers to questions, and we'll try pair up questions and answers, which would be amusing for me, but probably not for you guys. But other than that, I hope you guys found out something interesting, and we'll leave it here.
Cheers.